right. Welcome to Art Fight Podcast number 91. We have a very special guest that you can't see yet. Today is super excited about this one for sure. This is sort of a Tennessee native story. So I think that our local people here are really going to appreciate this, and then I'm sure everyone around the world will appreciate it as well. But I really wanted to start this one off in a special way. So Wayne White, welcome. Thank you for being here, man.
Thanks for having me.
So
Good to talk to you.
yeah, so the way I want to start this off here is, I did a little bit of research, and I was looking back at Jim Ridley's piece that he wrote about you in 2009,
Yeah.
and I'd seen something somewhere where you said that was your favorite interview that you ever did,
It sure is.
right? So
No hyperbole. That's in print. That's my favorite. One of my favorite pieces. One of my favorite articles for sure. That was the "Who's he think he is"
yeah.
issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in the spirit of riding the coattails of greatness, which I think is also perhaps a narrative here, I am going to, instead of giving this sort of biographical spiel about you, I'm just going to read some words from the great Jim Ridley to bring everybody into sort of a point of orientation about this. And we can just pick up where that conversation left off and then some. But my favorite part of this was, Jim Ridley was talking about your George Jones, massive scale sculpture that was a commission for Rice University Art Gallery in Houston, and a sort of site specific thing. And this is what Jim said, and so I just want to read this real quick. I've never read anybody else's writing on this, but this is one where it's worthwhile. He said, and it just can't be said any better. He said, "The irony in this is that Wayne White's work, in many ways, is a reaction against the tyranny of the swelled head. He honed his career in a culture snob's idea of the Bush Leagues, cartoons, puppet shows, children's TV. As an artist, he invokes pomp for purely comic effect, outfitting humble items such as thrift store paintings with imposingly grandiose text elements." Right? The guy's now the subject of a lavish monograph, the kind of career-capping coffee table brick most artists lust for, and yet its title mocks just that sort of hubris. "Maybe now I'll get the respect I so richly deserve."
Oh, so good.
So good.
Yeah.
And so I figured we would put you in a good spot by just trying to ride the coattails of the late great Jim Ridley, and it is in terms of Nashville, I mean, I can't think of anything more quintessential than that, and a lot of in a lot of ways your story as well. So we'll get into all those things, but welcome, Joe Nolan. Sorry, I haven't even talked to you yet here. I've just been focusing on.
I'm just happy to be riding the coattails of greatness here at the Untitled Podcast.
Yeah, man. So and there's a lot to get into. We can take a lot of turns here, but one of the things I want to make sure I get to before we forget and I get distracted. My favorite sort of narrative that I hear I've heard this from a lot of artists, and it's certainly been something that I've experienced in my time. You have a constant story and sort of a reminder or a lesson to remind people that if you want to do something, go to the source, go to where everyone is way better than you and suffer through getting better. Right.
Yeah.
So Mike, I guess if I was going to wrap that into a question, it's like, it's clear that you've had this very long progression, and we can get into some of those points of enlightenment you've had through your time, but how are you keeping that spirit alive now? Right.
Well, that's something I didn't purposely engineer in my life. I just kind of accidentally found myself in that situation because I thought I was a hot shot going up there to New York. I thought it's going to be a level playing ground, but suddenly I found myself in dire danger like that, and with everybody better than me. So I decided I would play like, I meant to do that. It's a piece of wisdom, but I turned it into a piece of wisdom for myself. And I quickly realized that, yeah, this is the great way to learn. It's do or die. You're out on a limb. and it's the ultimate existential situation. And as far as like keeping that kind of challenge alive in my life now, that's kind of hard to sustain
Hmm.
uh, for very long. That's kind of a young man's game, you
Yeah.
know. If I was under the same pressure now, it would kill me. But I do try to challenge myself, and I do try to keep experimenting and do new things. And I'm married to a genius, Mimi Pond, and she keeps me on my toes. So I try not to be lazy. You know, I try to keep going, especially in these days when lethargic days that we're in.
Hmm. I think it's an interesting time. I see lots of artists who partly seem confused as to what to do. Other artists who feel like they don't have anything to say about the times we're in right now, and so they just don't feel like saying anything. And then other artists who seem to be like really active because they've become inspired in some way by this whole situation, and they've come across lots of opportunities in some other ways than real life, public exhibitions and whatnot that we normally go through. What are some of the things, like when you just mentioned that that you try to find ways to stay engaged and keep growing and keep learning, and really at the end of the day, like, our podcast always really comes back to those kinds of lessons. So, like, what kind of things are you doing to keep you still inspired to keep making new work? We just mentioned before we got on the air that you post paintings to your Twitter account a lot, and I see those all the time. And I asked you before we started how many of those were new paintings, and you admitted that not all of them are new, but about 50% of them are new, which still means you're doing a lot of work. So what keeps the fire going for you these days?
Well, like Chuck Close once said, inspiration is for amateurs. You get up and you make yourself do it whether you want to or not. And that's just the self-discipline of being an artist, especially a freelance artist.
Yeah, well said.
So yeah, and it's not that much different for Mimi and I. It's still our normal routine. We both work at home, so we're working at home as usual. But lately, I've been using puppets to inspire me. I've had this new vision of puppetry again. Now that we're stuck at home, and I've been wanting to do homemade puppet shows for a long time. I used that. That's how I started out. In New York and Nashville, especially in Nashville. I did a lot of homemade puppet shows in Nashville, and then I wound up doing Mrs. Kabable's Caboose there in Nashville, which is a whole nother story. Channel 8. But I had this, and I've always kind of used puppets as a coping device, almost not like in therapy, talk to the puppet and tell it, not like that, but just as it's just something that I feel like is my own, that I've put my own stamp on, that nobody around me is doing. And I always seem to turn to puppets in a crisis. Like when I was in college at MTSU in Murfreesboro, I started doing puppets because I was sick of art school and fine art. I wanted something to excite me about art again, so I started doing them, and I got a tremendous response. So I kept doing them, and I did them in Nashville because I was graduated, and I was 23, 24 years old, lost in the world, not knowing what to do. So I kept doing the puppet shows, and it seemed to ground me. And best of all, it got me a lot of attention and approval from people.
Hmm.
And that's what young artists constantly need. They need some kind of validation. So I used it for the validation thing. Then I moved to New York, and I kept doing them just because it was a big fucking scary place, and a puppet stage was like a little fort. I even called it Arsenal Puppet Theater, and you could kind of hide in this fort and go to house parties or nightclubs and be over in the corner doing puppet shows, and maybe nobody's that to cope with the chaos of New York City. And lo and behold, it led to a professional career in doing them, which I never started out to do. I just did them because I clung to them as a security thing and as a way to work out, just to keep me excited about making art. They just do. I can't explain it. But now in this new crisis, I've again turned to puppets as
Hmm.
as I hate to say coping device. but I do seem to turn to them in crisis or when I need to define myself. And right now, I just felt like it's a new time. It's a new world, and it's time to redefine. It's time to reinvent, and time to, you know, try something new and experiment. So I'm doing this puppet show on Instagram, the WWF Puppet Show, and I've done two. I've done two so far. I'm working on a third one right now. They're coming along slowly because it's a one man operation, but I'm really having a good time doing them, and I feel like I'm helping people maybe cope a little bit themselves. You know.
Yeah, I think that it's been really interesting for me. I was having a conversation just earlier today with someone about how music has been really strange for me during this time, because a lot of the music that you would turn to just sort of make yourself be at ease, or, you know, your sort of standby records or whatever, a lot of stuff just sounds, it's a different prism that it's coming through now or something. It's hard to explain. So it maybe feels a little vacuous to, I don't know, just to listen to the Beach Boys or something. It seems I'm not saying everything needs to be militant and upset or fearful or heavy. It just, certain things come through in this time differently, and I'm trying to map that out or try to understand that more. But that makes it obviously a little bit more confusing to figure out sort of what is it that you should be responding with or doing, or should you even respond, or you just stay the course and just do what you've always done. But I do appreciate like the coping term. You know, I suppose that's better than like happy place, right? That's a little loaded as well.
You could say that too. There's a million cliches you could say, and they're all be true. That's the problem with cliches; they're true.
Yes. Well, I mean that's a good segue also into like sort of the nature of your paintings in terms of your use of language and words as monoliths and all that. Has any of that? I mean, you've been doing that for a good while now, right? So, how has that evolved for you, and where do you see it going? Is that also sort of like this is a comfortable sort of channel that I can sort of always go to, and I feel like this is part of my kind of repertoire? If you were a musician, right, it'd be like in your repertoire, or is it something that you're like, I don't know, like I just do it when I feel like it?
No, I keep the paintings going on a regular basis because that's part of the Wayne White business, you know.
Yeah,
That they sell, and I don't mind doing them, and I've always got something new to say and something new to try with them. That's a big part of what I do in the studio. But back to what and I will always do the bird paintings. I'll always do them. I just they're associated with me, and I don't mind being branded like that. I'll do them because I like it. But back to something earlier you were saying about how should we respond? What should be, you know, that's part of the artist's deal, is that you just kind of pay attention, and it'll tell you how to respond. I always say, like, when you're making a piece of art in the studio, it's a collaboration. You know, you're not the dictator. The minute a line or a piece of color, the minute you start a piece of art, it's starting to talk back to you, and it's telling you what it wants to do. And I know that sounds crazy, but every artist believes in that certain kind of voodoo or magic, and it's true. And it's the same way with life. You know, it's going to tell you. The artist has to be in a position to just listen and respond and collaborate with the world, not just, you know, you're not alone. You're a collaborator with the world when you're an artist, and it's going to tell you things if you just kind of learn how to listen to it.
Yeah, this is already our most quotable show, by the way, Wayne. So we appreciate your eloquence here. I want to tell you though that I think I agree with you. And last episode we did, we were talking with our guest then, a guy who has done some music. We were talking about the idea that, you know, it's you're not so much sitting down and like writing a song as much as you're sort of discovering a song that's already there in some way, you know.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I feel like that's sort of the theme that's run through a few of our episodes, and I'm glad to hear it in your words. But that said, at the end of the day, as artists, we have to ultimately bring those things back to the real world. And I know that with our podcast, we've had, our challenges in terms of, trying to upgrade from being just an audio podcast to being able to have 3 people on video and all this kind of stuff. Have you had what was the learning curve like for you from going from creating the kind of home puppet shows you used to do,
from abstract
to
expressionism,
finding a way to finding a way to actually make those available through Instagram?
Well, the last time I did home puppet shows was ancient history, way back in the 20th century, really, and I was using a big ass old video camera. I had to rent a 3/4 video camera or something like that, just set it up, one shot. I'm still basically doing the same thing now because I'm limited. I just use my iPhone and I just put it on a tripod, 1 shot, 2 shots. I do the 2 shot, it's like a puppet.
That's ambitious.
And I do it in 1 take. And I'm eventually I'm going to start editing and doing them longer with close-ups and stuff. But right now the challenge is to just do a minute-long 1 take 2 shot, and
cool.
And the energy and the tension and the just the feel of that is something I'm interested in, not something carefully pieced together post. A live performance, and I think that comes through. I think. The energy of that is something people respond to. And plus, it's just the simplest thing for me to do right now. I want to expand it, but it's very simple. There's no, just anybody could do it. You just set the camera up and go, and you do take after take, and you pick the best take. And I keep it under a minute because I want it to be on Instagram, and I don't want it to be, extended.
Right.
So. And I'm a big fan of Ernie Kovacs. I don't know if y'all know who Ernie Kovacs is. You ever heard of him?
Mm-mm.
He was you got to check him out. He was a TV pioneer of the late 50s. He died in a car wreck when he was young in 1961. But he was an early TV Dadaist. And he did these weird little blackout surrealist sketches on television that were real low tech, but very, very ingenious and weird. And William Wegman, the performance artist, the video artist, got a lot from him. And I loved William Wegman's early videos too. He's a big influence. So it's just this kind of deadpan, dada, dumb joke kind of thing. I urge everybody to check out Ernie Kovacs. There's some Ernie Kovacs stuff on YouTube. It's really cool.
How cool is it that everything is available now to be archived, sourced, seen? Because I just think about how growing up, how hard it was just to get any insight, as to what people were doing or how they were doing it. And, growing up in the South, right? I grew up in North Carolina, you grew up in Chattanooga, and, Joe grew up in Detroit, but whatever. Just the idea that there was this veil of, there was something about being in the South where it was like what was going on in New York or LA or in entertainment or in the music industry. Everything felt so separate, and like it was just another dimension that I was just trying to get to, and I feel like
even more so for me. I'm older than you guys.
Yes, sir.
It was back then. It was magazines and album covers. You had to music really had mystique back then. You would study these album covers, every little inch of it, and read the liner notes like there was something sensible in a liner note, and then you'd go to a magazine store and you'd sit there at the magazines, and that was about it,
Yeah, the hunt was a participatory act. It was and it was a thing that you and your friends would all team up. You would be all sort of into the same thing, and you're like, okay, we've got to figure out where the studio in New York is putting out this stuff. Like, what else is going on there? If you see anything, grab it. Yeah. And think about how many shitty records we bought, but we still found value in them because they gave us some insight into another world.
Oh yeah, a record cover used to mean everything. You know, a record cover was a portal to another world. And to be an artist and make a record cover, that was like the the golden dream for me when I was a kid. You know, those an album was the most powerful piece of art I knew as a kid. That and comic books. You know, that's what art was for me. And I and I think there was a certain value when things had more of a mystique. Maybe. I don't know. I think it's great now too. I think it's great to be able to travel the world, you know, on a computer and look up stuff, and obscure
Right.
things are getting their due, you know, and stuff like that. That's I'm not going to be the cranky old man, you know.
Right.
I don't believe in the good old days. I
Right.
don't.
Yeah. Another great quote. So I keep breaking into on these great quotes. I feel like that's, I mean, back to what we talked about earlier about how do you keep motivated, how do you keep doing what you're doing. You mentioned being older than we are. I'm right on the edge of being 50 this year, so I've already come up
Hey,
against the same thing of trying to the same thing of trying to be trying to be motivated and try to stay focused and try to learn and grow, as you go on and on and on in what you're doing creatively. And I think, when it comes to, the way things used to be versus the way things are now, I recently was doing some writing, and within that I started talking about Andy Warhol for a second, and I was like, I think the biggest thing that Andy Warhol did was, so he was sort of like one of like the spearhead of breaking down the boundaries between what we call fine art and what we might call pop art or what we might call folk art, all those divisions that at the beginning of your career were much more firmly in place. How has the fact that a lot of those categories have broken down now, how has that affected your career over the last 30 years, let's say 40 years?
well, I didn't. By the time I came along, the idea of pop art and postmodernism and art being a rigid one thing was already breaking down a lot.
Uh-huh.
So there'll always be a high snobby fine art world kind of deal. It's just the way people with money are going to be, you know.
Yeah, well said.
But
They can't help
it was already
themselves.
breaking down, and I didn't let it bother me at all. Mostly out of naivete, I just thought everything, as long as it involves drawing or painting or making something, some kind of image, it's art to me. And I did not debate the issue, and I still don't. You know, and believe me, it was not something that I formulated. It was just naivete, and it was just the love of making pictures. You know, I don't even like to call paintings paintings. I like to call them pictures. You know, I try to find I try to find my own little vocabulary to keep it real to me and not feel like I am in an institution, although
Mhm.
I am. You know, art's an institute. That's another thing that's bugging me. That's not bugging me, but it's sad right now. It's like so many people that had to stay at home are lost, you know, because they are plugged into institutions,
Mhm.
and that's the way society is. It's just the way it's going to be. I'm not going to judge them, and
Mhm.
got to make money, but people are so plugged into institutional hierarchies, and
Mhm.
that's the fucking freedom of the artist, you know. Even though free will is an illusion and all that, at least we are, at least we're representative of some kind of free will or some kind of independence from an institution.
Yeah. It's almost like you've really seen a lot of people either kind of fall on the side of either those that are bound to institution or the broader constructs that people fall into. They will be they find themselves very unmoored right now.
Yeah, and
Whereas,
that's
right, people like maybe me or you or whatever, I'm like, I was made for I've been doing this, and that doesn't mean
yeah.
that that's also a place of privilege. I don't have anybody directly affected in my immediate life. I mean, I try to keep that in check, but ultimately it is this kind of thing where like this is fairly instinctive.
Yeah, yeah. I don't mean to gloat about it, but I guess I
Yeah.
can gloat a little because it was a decision in my life, and it's something I've fought for 30, 40 years to make a reality, and I did create it for myself. So can be a little proud of that,
Yeah.
as opposed to being proud of being from the South, which is completely meaningless. I hate regional pride of any kind. It's like, I just happen to be born here and it's the greatest place in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the portal through which the universe passed me, and therefore I now lay claim to it retroactively or something. It's very strange.
Yeah, pride is not good, but you got to be proud about something. And I guess I am proud about the fact that I come from a blue collar, lower middle class, but I found my way in the world as an artist. And looking back on it, I see that it was almost impossible to do that, yet I did it. So, hey, I'm bragging.
Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, I think, again, you know, a lot of times this show comes down to just really focusing on, you know, the nuts and bolts of the journey itself. You know what I mean? And I feel like, you know, I totally understand where you're coming from and saying, like, you know, it wasn't an accident that you did the things you did. You made choices that were difficult and had to deal with the consequences of those choices. And now here you are in the Art Fight podcast. Who would have thought? But I feel like I understand what you're saying, and I do think it is important, and I do think that, you know, artists who are able to, you know, find some kind of success and sustainability for their practice, and at the same time stay independent of those institutions. It's really a rare thing to be able to thread that needle, and I think that's kind of the ideal, because just making the work or just making the money or just getting the attention or whatever, that's all maybe a part of it. But I think at the end of the day, something that you're speaking to right now is the idea that being an artist is really about values and about defining a sense of what those values are and then living those values. If you had to boil down, like, the things that you value, what are some of the things that you've, you know, set up as like your guideposts in terms of your practice, or, you know, the line you wouldn't cross in your practice? You know, what are the things that have, you know, sort of been the spotlights along the way that have helped you make this journey?
That's a tough one to answer because it changes so much as you age. At first,
Talk
I
about
was
that.
like, at first, it was all about just being naive. You know, I could crow about, you know, I figured it all out early and this is the path. No, I was just a young fool who thought I was the greatest thing in the world. And I thought the world is just waiting for me. And here I come, world. And wait till you see what I got. You know, typical young people's optimism and naivete. And I went into the belly of the beast that way, you know, and I was lucky. I survived. But because of some values that I started that are still alive in me, number one is drawing and just keeping the craft alive, you know, keeping your powder dry, keeping that gun clean, and getting ready to step out in the street yet for another gunslinging adventure. You know, I often thought of myself as that way, as a gunslinger. You know, you got to keep on the edge. You know, you got to keep practicing that draw, literally.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so that's one value that hasn't changed for me ever since I was young. I knew I had to keep that craft alive, especially when I got up there to New York City and I was around all those hot shots, man. That's when I really stepped up my game. And then the naivete and the energy of being young just kind of helped me survive that crazy ocean stream. I always thought of it as a giant turbulent ocean, you know, and at first I was clinging to a little log, and then I got another log and another log, and I made a little raft, and then there was a boat full of some friends. Can I get in your boat? Yeah. So I got in the boat, and then I got in a bigger boat. So my youth helped me survive. And then I don't know, I got lucky. I got some lucky breaks. Pee-wee's Playhouse. I mean, how many times has that happened to somebody in a lifetime? That was just like getting to go to Oz. You know, that just changed my life completely. And then so that vaulted me professionally, and I started making money and stuff. And then I started getting on my toes professionally because I knew I was around a new set of hot shots. I'm a very competitive guy. I get that from my upbringing in the 60s in Chattanooga playing sports. My old man's a big jock. He was a coach. And when I was a kid, you either played sports or you were a reject, you were an outcast.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned a lot of competition from sports. Some people call it zero sum or whatever. I don't know. I learned to be competitive. I think that helped me too from an early age. It also limited me too, because whenever I went into a situation when I was young, whether it was a classroom or waiting in the lobby with other artists, I was always looking around going, okay, who's who's the best? Who do I have to beat? You know,
Mm-hmm.
or I go into a classroom. Not that I'm here open-minded and ready to learn. I look around. Okay, who's the best artist in this class? You. Okay, you know. So I guess that's a certain way to learn, but it's sort of closed me off in a lot of ways too. And I had to
Sure.
get humbled by New York City to learn that I wasn't the best. I wasn't even in the running. You know, that humbled me and taught me a big lesson. And then showbiz just kept this competitive thing going, and that's why I survived in Hollywood. You know, because I was competitive. And
Do you feel like do you feel like that you know, you're sort of constant wrestling with the swelled head and the ego
oh yeah,
and all of this? I mean, it seems like that's a pretty well, it's like sort of a projection of this embattlement that you've constantly been sort of wrestling with, maybe.
that, that's one of the themes of my word paintings is
Yeah.
ego and vanity and
Yeah.
hubris and
Mhm.
all is vanity. Really, that sums up the theme of my word paintings. All is vanity, in a way. I I I think that's a great theme. The human ego, human vanity. I think it's the root of all evil. I think it's also hilarious. It's the funniest thing in the world because it's all, you know, dust.
I appreciate too very much that you really have you have a, I believe that objects have power in some way. I don't know how or why, but like old objects, right? Like you talk about, these paintings have sat through all these inane conversations, and you know, right? Like just 30 years of you know, bad television reruns, or you know, it's absorbed all of this somehow, metaphysically or otherwise. You know, I don't know how else, like if you believe in the power of objects in this way, you know, like how do you reconcile that with maybe things that you're creating that are completely new? Or do you feel like that's something that you just sort of choose, you either have that quality about your medium, or you just sort of don't, or because I feel like that things that have that quality seem to run naturally, more quickly, more deeply, and have some weird intangible, like I'm plugged into it faster and I don't know why.
Now, what quality are you
I mean, like
do you
this,
mean?
meaning like the sort of existing media, right? Like found object, or
Oh, found objects. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, yeah. I totally, and I think a lot of people feel this way. I totally identify with found objects because they show the ups and downs of life, just like a human face does. You know, I would much prefer something kind of worn down and battered. A lot of people like that. You know, it's a certain aesthetic. You know, the used worn object with a history. It's we relate to them as humans, and yeah, I came across the whole word painting thing on found thrift stores at a moment's whim. That's how this whole thing started. I had a few of them laying around, and I just decided to experiment one day. But I was wanting to put giant letters in my already painted landscapes that I was doing, but I decided just one day as an experiment to use these thrift store paintings. And later I sort of found out meanings there that I didn't really know of, or maybe or like I said, I listened to the whole process and it kind of explained itself to me. The fact that these found thrift store landscapes I use are pretty much kind of me in a way. They're from the same socioeconomic bracket I was in. They were in my parents' house, all my friends' houses, the doctor's office. I grew up with them. They're part of my American DNA, you know. So they were me, and they were America. They were a lot of people. They were a whole generation of certain people, and so they're this American kind of collective consciousness almost, you know. And so that I liked that they were non-pretentious. They weren't of the art world, but they were pictures, and I liked, you know, I just liked they were kind of a place to escape to, almost away from the pretensions of the art world. I've often thought of Mary Poppins when they jump into the chalk drawings. You know, Bert draws the chalk drawings and the kids jump into them. Oh God, I love that.
Yeah.
Love that movie so much, and it really sent me. And I often think of that when you're making a picture of those kids jumping into those pictures like that. And that's something I kind of want to do. You know, I think that's. I also wanted to jump into the ViewMaster when I looked at it as a kid, and I think that's something that all artists share. They glimpsed a world that they want to be a part of, but they can't quite get there, so they spend their whole life trying to make it around them somehow. You know, that's what going into these thrift store paintings are like. That's what making these giant installations are like for me. I'm making this ViewMaster Mary Poppins world that I wanted to live in as a kid. You know.
So, yeah, I love that. And by the way, this has nothing to do with anything, but I saw on the on Twitter yesterday there was a house posting, some house in Maryland, this crazy sort of McMansion house, and whoever these people were wildly eccentric, but they had an entire basement that was built to look like a town square inside, you know, subterranean, but with storefronts and just the whole thing. And as I was sort of thinking about, you know, we were coming up on talking to you, and I was like, there is some weird, like, I don't know, a drive for wonder that people, if they have the means, they are going to make it happen, you know. And this was, but by the way, you mentioned Mary Poppins, and that's what made me think about it, because they had a theater in their basement, at least the exterior, what seems to be a theater, and on the marquee, it said double feature Mary Poppins. It's a double feature Mary Poppins, The Exorcist, and my wife and I were like, that sounds like a great movie if it were just one movie.
Yeah, it's a very human drive to create your own little world. It is. It's nothing new to me. People have been doing it since we could scratch on the wall, you know.
Yeah.
And it's driven a lot of artists to create incredible wonderlands, you know, all the great folk artist gardens and stuff like that. And showbiz is the same way, making a set, you know. I've always wanted the art to come alive somehow, you know. That's why I like puppets, because it's like a little guy that I can make that comes alive. And I did animation for a while. I really got into animation seriously through Beakman's world, and then I did some rock videos with it and Disney Channel stuff. I did it all on my own on a computer, and I just loved it so much. And it finally, I talk about this in the documentary, it drove me insane. I had a fucking breakdown over there because I just couldn't stop doing it. I would draw something, and I would just be like, it was like heroin. I just had to sit there for 6 more hours straight and make this little guy come alive and make it look convincing. And the minute he started walking and talking, it's like, oh, then it's 6 more hours to make him do something else. Before you know it, you know, I was I was a mess. So I love animation too. I'd love to go back to it.
Man, that sounds like it sounds to me from the outside, people that are not animators, it seems so torturous, right? It seems
it is. It's incredible amount of work.
Yeah.
But I was driven.
Yeah.
I've never been driven as much as that. It was just so magic, you know.
So I imagine in your time, in your sort of progression, especially younger days in New York, making your way, all of that. I know you were a short order cook. I read about that. I'm sure that informed your work, and I can't imagine. Imagine somebody as sort of natively in real world creatively inspiring as you. I can't imagine what you were doing at the Empire, but I'm sure it was badass. I'm sure it was not your regular sunny side up. I'm sure there was some creation.
No, I didn't you couldn't get creative, you know, with the customers. They want what's in you.
Yeah.
I started out at the IHOP in Chattanooga as a short order in high school, and then I did it for almost a little over a year in New York. Short order cooking is a real, you know, it's a real thing, you know. And I could handle any kind of rush and stuff. it did kind of influence my work in a way. It helps you. Well, first of all, it's like anything with this. It's like I don't want to do this the rest of my fucking life, so I better get on the stick with the art. But other than that, this is just the rhythm and the dance of it, and the organization of it, and the systematic thing of it. And
flow state,
and being proud of your skills of being able to flip these eggs and keep everything pretty. And I took a lot of pride in my work. I always plated it perfectly, and I was very prideful of my work, even though I hated it. Yeah, I don't know. I recently read this thing about William Burroughs, where one of his concepts was do easy, DE, where everything. Live your life with precision and grace, and jujitsu kind of take the energy from something and transfer it, but do everything with precision. Put the pencil down just so. When you're making coffee in the morning, do your steps just so. Don't stumble around and drop and break. So that short ordering. It reminded me of short ordering was very DE. Do easy. Mm-hmm. Keep everything down to the most elegant pattern. Get your shit together. Don't know extra moves, Yeah. It's the attack, and that's the way a drawing or painting is, and it's important to have the attack. Mm-hmm. Attack. It should show confidence, and it should show elegance, and there shouldn't be anything that shouldn't be there. Mm-hmm. So it's all kind of tied together in a way.
Yeah, that's interesting. I love the idea of the attack, and of course, on the Art Fight podcast, we talk a lot to fighters and martial arts coaches and things like that. I'll tell you, there's another anecdote about Burroughs that maybe I'll sneak in later, but I wanted to go back one step and go to you talking about, learning your competitive ways from doing sports as a kid. Did you ever wrestle or box or do martial arts or anything like that?
No. I was too wimpy for that. I was a baseball. I played sports in the neighborhood growing up, and then I was organized sports. I played baseball.
Oh, right on. What position were you?
Well, I started out at first base. I had the first base mitt and everything. I'd do the stretch and all that stuff.
Oh, right on.
And I was our league was called Dixie Youth. Dixie Youth.
Sounds like an indoctrination.
Yeah, well, so we had the battle flag right there on the thing, and my daddy was a coach. He was never my coach. Uh-huh. But I was a good fielder. I could field. My downfall, hitting. Mm-hmm. I could not hit. Couldn't hit worth a shit. And so that was my Achilles heel with baseball. Yeah.
It's important to be able to hit, yeah.
Yeah, the problem with my hitting it's like I was knocked out more than once with throwing balls, hitting the shit. Man. So every time I'd get up to bat, I was getting ready to dodge the ball rather than looking to hit it,
Yeah. I was kind of the same way. I was a good fielder, and I really enjoyed fielding. But once we got into the upper level of fastball, middle school age kind of stuff, then it's just the batting part got harder and harder. And I was from, probably much like you, this working class family where, my parents always emphasize doing your best at things and, would get a good grade and all this kind of stuff. So it's one of the first things in my life that I came up against, and where it was really hard for me. And I ultimately got better. I had a coach who really helped me with this trick where he gave me these tiny little wiffle golf balls and a shovel handle. And he's like, if you can hit this ball with this stick, you'll be able to hit anything. And I got my batting back together doing that. But as soon as I had shown and proved to myself that I could learn how to do this, I also was like, you know what? I don't even want to do this. I don't want to. This is too much work for something I'm not even really enjoying. And I moved off into other things. But I learned a lot from sports, because of those kinds of lessons that you're talking about. And I think there's a whole lot about, a lot of the themes in the Art Fight podcast we talk a lot about how, creativity comes into these activities like martial arts and combat sports, but that fighting spirit also speaks to the arts.
Sports and arts are totally close together. I mean, the Olympics are supposed to be a celebration of both, but the TV never shows it,
Well,
it's about art too. and they're very close. Art, music, and sports are kissing cousins, totally. And I did learn from sports, and it was a very big trauma for me though, because it was the first thing I really failed at, and it was very, and I didn't even get to middle school with it. I dropped out in sixth grade with it, and it was like traumatic as hell for me because I felt like a loser, and I had horrible coaches. My father's my father's a good man, but he's completely withholding, completely shut down emotionally, and he couldn't help me, and he was embarrassed that I wasn't good and all this crap. And it was like this source of shame and trauma. You know, that's stupid. I was a fucking 12-year-old boy, and I'm full of shame because I can't hit a ball. It's ridiculous, and none of the adults around me wanted to deal with it.
Why didn't you just try harder? That's what I don't understand. Why didn't you just try harder?
It took me a whole year to get over it, the fact that I wasn't going to be an athlete. And then about 14 years old, I snapped out of it. And
I think sports, I don't know, in certain ways now it seems like kids are up against a whole new level of pressure that I can't really understand. It was different, I think, at least when I was a kid growing up in, say, the 70s, playing soccer and whatever. It was kind of brutal in the sense that, like, I was asthmatic. I'm running around with my shoulders up like this. I can't breathe, but I'm still somehow like trying to outrun everybody. And then I remember there was one game when I was probably 7 where I don't know what happened. I remember approaching somebody defensively, and then I don't remember anything else. And then I woke up and I was on the field. But what happened was I tripped and fell, and as he was going to launch the ball down the field, my head replaced perfectly the ball, and then he just sort of shoelaces up, just launched on my head, and knocked me out cold. Right, and here I am. Yeah. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, maybe. And the thing that I remember most about it is I remember waking up, and back then it was always those 3 words: walk it off, right? Yeah. Walk it off. And so
rub some dirt on it.
Yeah. So I remember like going over to the sideline after fully being unconscious, concussion, clearly head injury, whatever, and then playing in the second half.
Yeah, sure.
Because that was how it was.
I was knocked out at least 3 or 4 times when I was.
Yeah.
And I haven't been since. I've not been knocked unconscious as from 12 years old on, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, I was bitter about it as a teenager, but I gotten over that.
Yeah.
It was good, you know. And my father was quite the athlete, and he was, you know, he was not happy that I was not an athlete.
So one of the things I want to get to also is one of my favorite things with people that are, you know, obviously accomplished and have been able to figure it out somehow, failing forward, tripping, falling forward, whatever you want to call it, right? People have done it. I love, everybody's got a story that's just sort of like their oh shit moment, right? Like the not just an epic fail kind of moment, but just it's always made of a particular type of humiliation that I love. I enjoy it, right? So I just didn't know if you had anything where it comes to mind where you're like, you know what, like, you know, I had this one thing where I thought I was hot shit, or, you know, where did something go horribly wrong where it was the most painful for you emotionally? I would love to talk about
it. Well, there's all kinds of horrible, embarrassing things. I'm a human, you know. I was talking to somebody else the other day, and it says, how many horror stories start with, and then in front of the whole class?
Yeah.
You know, I did go to Edward Smith's sleepover in the 6th grade, and Edward Smith was the coolest guy in the class. He was like, he wore Nehru jackets, for God's sake. He also went on to play for the Detroit Lions, you know.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He was a linebacker. And so every guy in the 6th grade wanted to be invited to this sleepover party. And so I was afraid to go upstairs and pee because the bathroom was right next door to his parents' bedroom. And I didn't want them to hear me pee. So I was holding it in. And all of a sudden they turned the lights off and everybody started wrestling. And I peed all over the floor. This big puddle on Edward Smith's floor. And the lights came back up and I was not invited to Edward Smith's house ever again. I don't know why I did that. I haven't even thought of that in years.
That's what we're here for.
That's probably not what you were looking for.
Uh, I mean, hey,
Yeah, I mean, everybody's, you know, everybody's got a. That's life. That's life.
it really is. So, and what else are you terrible at?
I'm terrible at football, basketball.
Mm.
Uh, I archery. I tried archery in college. Terrible. Uh, geez, can't cook very well.
Hey, you mentioned that that there's this pressure from your family regarding sports and stuff, but once you got past that and started making these choices to be the creative person that you actually clearly are, how supportive were they? I know for lots of artists, like their parents and their friends, like not accepting what they're doing or accepting what they're doing can make all the difference early on, especially.
Well, my parents were as supportive as they could be. My parents are both a country boy and a country girl from Sand Mountain, Alabama,
Hmm.
and they didn't know about art or anything. Although my mother was sort of interested in art, but they had no idea who an artist was, what the artist's path was going to be, and
Hmm.
but they were proud of me that I had talent. I mean, I was always the kid who could draw all through school. I made
Yeah.
sure of that, made sure I was the champion drawer. So everybody knew I could draw, and my daddy would be proud of me when I would draw at the bowling alley and draw pictures of his buddies and all that. So I was the kid who could draw, and they could saw I had real talent, and so they did not poo-poo it. They didn't support it either. They didn't try to mentor me or try to put me in touch with people because there wasn't any. There
Right.
was nothing. It was Chattanooga, Tennessee in the 60s and 70s.
Hmm.
So they supported me in the best way they knew how, but laissez-faire. They
Hmm.
let me just do it. They didn't just say, Wayne, you shouldn't be thinking of being an artist. They knew I was going to be one.
Hmm.
They were bewildered and a little scared and a bit threatened, because who is this creature we made? Has all these aspirations. In fact, one time I was down in Atlanta working for Cartoon Network back in the early '90s, and they came down to see me, and I showed them all these set drawings I was doing for the show, and my mother was just like, oh. I go, what's wrong, Mama? She goes, Wayne, this scares me. This scares me what you do. It's too good. What? You scare me. Oh, Jesus Christ. That was kind of a moment for me. I understood, like, they don't want to, they, they, they love me, but they can't deal with what I had become. My really can't deal with it. He cannot deal with it. Whenever I start showing him stuff I've done, he gets this look like, take it away. Away. I don't know what to do or say about it's weird. They're threatened by this alien I've become from, this little Southern boy, factory worker boy, you know, to Mr. Hotshot New York artist. They don't know what that means or is.
Yeah, he's kind of fruity, but he's got something going for him. Yeah.
Like my mom was always doing that. The whole time I was in New York, I'd come home and she'd take me aside. She goes, Wayne, you're sounding like a Yankee. And I'd be like, the shame.
Yeah, I always had the problem of growing up in the South. People said, you don't sound like you're from here. And then I moved to New York, and people are like, you don't sound like you're from here. I've never been able to sound like I'm wherever I'm from. So now I just sit in Nashville in the Midwest and just say, well, I'm just a tourist, But for the last 20 years. But speaking of Nashville, real quick, I wanted to. There's a question here about. Curious about Wayne's connection to Kurt Wagner, the band Lamb Chop, of course, and your history. Obviously the album covers. What does Wayne think of Lamb Chop? I mean, geez, that's gonna put you on the spot. I mean, of course it's genius. I mean, and Kurt's a genius. But
I love Lamb Chop. You kidding?
Yeah.
I've been a fan of Lamb Chop ever since they were called Poster Child, and I met Kurt in 1980 when I moved to Nashville after I graduated from MTSU, and I've seen him go through all kinds of changes and stuff, and working at the flooring business. And I was thinking, oh man! And then he started this band up, and the other guys at the flooring business were all like, oh yeah, Kurt's got a band. Yeah, right. It's 37 years old. It's kind of late. Then bam, he hit it with Lamb Chop, and I was so happy for him. And of course, my buddy Tony Crow's in the band too, and a bunch of guys. And I was so happy for him that he hit it and got with Merge. And by that time, I'd already had my success, so I wasn't threatened like all his Nashville buddies were. And I was happy for him because I had my thing, and now he got his. And then he gave me my dream come true of being an album cover artist with Nixon, and that was probably the first big exposure of my word paintings.
Yeah.
It's a fucking poster all over London, England.
Yeah.
So I love Lamb Chop, and I love seeing them grow and become the entity that they are. And Kurt's a great painter and artist himself, and he's one of my best friends, and always, he's my Nashville connection. And,
I think it's such a classic Nashville thing in the sense that band here can play, the VFW. I mean, I live on the west side of town, right? The Charlotte Avenue VFW was like the spot. You can go see Lamb Chop play down at the VFW. You're right. If you're walking into like an old movie, it's the coolest place to see a show. Yeah. And then meanwhile, when Lamb Chop goes overseas, they'll play to, massive crowds, rabid, massive crowds. And then I don't know what it is about Nashville, even with people that are, even more, say, quote unquote, mainstream, there's just some weird deadpan, we've already seen it all Nashville thing, right? But I love that you sort of kind of escaped it, but also embodied what the Nashville story is at the same time.
Yeah, Kurt, he's been an inspiration to me, and I hope I've helped him along with my example. But Kurt, as an example, of a growing and changing artist, is important to me as a friend. And I in music itself, and Tony Crow also, that lives there in Nashville, is a great pianist. Music is, like I said earlier, music and art hold hands. And I am a crappy amateur musician myself. I play banjo and cigar box guitar, and I torture people with it on Instagram.
Yes. 60 seconds at a time.
I play music every day. I play strings every day, and it helps me think and relax. And I love doing my silly little numbers. So music is, I think all artists would agree. Music is right there. It's sort of the same thing.
Definitely. And so, speaking of, you have a video. There's a group outfit called Waltzer out of Chicago, right?
Yes.
And so I was checking them out. It's very cool. It's sort of I wouldn't say it's similar to Lamb Chop necessarily, but it is something in there's an underlying spirit to it, and sort of this kind of half in country western, half in something a little different. I found it to be remotely in the same category, right? But anyway, I'm just curious about the video that's coming out for them and what's happening there.
Yeah, that a guy named Dan Mystic texted me out of the blue and said, I'm representing this band, Waltzer, out of Chicago, and we don't have any money, but we got a little, and would you be wanting to do a little video for us? And he just caught me at the right time. It was just perfect because I had my little puppet studio up and running in my painting studio, and I was making all kinds of little doodads. And plus, my daughter in Lulu White, and she's in Queens. She's a great artist too. She graduated from Cooper Union a couple of years ago.
Awesome.
She's a sculptor and a painter, and she loves building stuff like I do. And so I got her. I thought, well, this would be a great chance for me and Lou to work together and give her a little job. So she made these little house puppets that I created, that I've designed and been working with over the years. And I did some backdrops and this and that, and little shoestring, do-it-yourself homemade production. And it would, like I said, it's not something I would normally do, but it was just kind of the right place, the right time kind of thing. And I love the do-it-yourself spirit. And I'm definitely in the do-it-yourself at home production mode. So I thought, yeah, I'll slip this in. And I like the sound of the band, the song, Eugene. And so we did it.
How about that, man? So, Joe.
Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Yes, fire away.
When was the last time you went to the Great Escape?
I was at the Great Escape in West Nashville, which is the only one left here in Nashville now. I was at the Great Escape in West Nashville. I think probably late fall. I have a friend who won a contest designing a shirt for them that actually looks like the old building in Midtown, and I ran in there to check in and see if I could get a shirt, but they didn't actually have them available yet. That was the last time I was there. Actually, there's another Great Escape in Madison, right up here by me.
Oh, there's more than one.
Yeah, and I think there's one or at least there used to be one in Bowling Green, I think, but I don't know if it's there anymore.
Yeah, I love, Wayne, that is the that's such a power spot for sort of the sharp turn that you know, the moment of your realization.
Yeah, I wandered in there in 1981 when I was living in Nashville for a year. I was working at the Cumberland Museum and Science Center up there on the hill, you know, the Discovery Center. I don't know what it's called now, but that was a really good job, actually. That's where I first started doing the exhibit design, which evolved into set design. And I used to, they had the greatest dumpster in the world, too. So I dumpster dive and build my own up stages there. And that was a great first art job for me right out of school, and it sustained me in Nashville for a whole year. And it also got me interested in graphic arts and commercial art as the way to make a living, you know, because I was not going to drive a truck. I had to do something. And that's when I transitioned into illustration and cartooning, because thinking about commercial art there at the museum. And I wandered into the Great Escape thinking that. And that's where I first saw Raw magazine that was being done by Art Spiegelman. And it was just the perfect blend of this abstract expressionist painting style and comic book storytelling, both things I was totally interested in. I used to be a cartoonist when I was in junior high, and I've always wanted to be one, sort of. And this expressionistic style they're using totally jived with what I was doing at the time and what I'd just spent 4 years at MTSU doing. So it's just this perfect synthesis of these interests of mine. It just blew my mind. And then I found the Comics Journal, and I looked up Art Spiegelman and the interview, and I found out he lived in New York. He taught at SVA, and so that inspired me to go up there and stalk Art Spiegelman in SVA and get it on his class and get it on the Raw scene. And that's how I met Gary Panner, which led to Pee Wee's Playhouse, and that's where I met all these other artists, and which led to meeting my wife Mimi. So the Great Escape was my portal into this whole new world of cartooning that I decided I was going to be. That moment with Raw magazine really, like a typical 22-year-old, I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to do for life. Yeah. Fuck painting. Fuck painting's for rich snobs. I'm a man of the people, and cartooning is art for the people, and I'm going to be a cartoonist, and I'm going to do it in New York City. And then they had incredible back archives of all the underground comics from the 60s and 70s, Arcade magazine, Bill Griffiths stuff, all that stuff, and the old classic stuff like Dick Tracy. And I just jumped feet first into the world of cartooning. I would go there every day, and I was tuned. I met Shel Silverstein in there one day, and we had a conversation about Harvey Kurtzman and Mad Magazine. And
it looks like did we lose you? Uh-oh. Joe, you're still there, right?
I'm still here, yeah.
Okay, we got.
We're just 1 hour in.
We'll just hang out for a second. Yeah, I mean, the Great Escape is such a power spot.
Yeah, no doubt. No, I sitting here talking about it, it reminded me of My golden age at the Great Escape was the last time I had a car with a cassette player in it, and I would go there all the time and just like buy 4 or 5 cassettes for like $2 or $3 a piece, because this was obviously this is sort of probably still the comeback of vinyl at that point. We'd already been through CDs, and I was just listening to all these tapes, and then as I would go through them, I'd just bring them back and resell them and then get more $3 tapes, and I would just listen to so much great music because it was so cheap, and it was fun to listen to this stuff on cassettes too.
So yeah, it looks like we lost Wayne entirely. But you know what? What's cool is that that's the first time that that's happened. So we can take solace in that.
Yeah. What's
the emergency? We don't have like an emergency procedure thing, right? Like I don't have like some, like we just watched Chernobyl, and I was, like where's the
Can you call him back at that Skype address?
Let me see here.
I'm not sure which. We had 2 of them for Wayne. I'm not sure which one he was using, but so far, I hope if anybody's like been tuning in live and listening to this live, I hope you guys have been enjoying this chat. This has been really informative, and like Wayne to me is somebody who, even more than I realized, he's really embodied like sort of so much of what we end up talking about here on the podcast in terms of how to be sustainable in your creativity, how to learn lessons from other things like sports. And I love the fact that he's had the same insight, that we had to start this whole podcast in the first place, which was the fact that there is all this overlap between the competitive and creative environment of sports, and the also creative and competitive environment that you find in the arts. He mentioned music as well. So I think it's this episode's been full of lessons for me, and and again, it's been highly quotable. I keep imagining you doing your short edits later, and you've got your work cut out for you, because there's a ton of them in this show.
Well,
what?
Oh, look at that.
Hey,
look, we're back.
I'm back.
Far out.
We got you back. Perfect.
Oh.
That's the first time that somebody's just jumped on us, right? Just was like, I'm out. It's also
you dove right into the painting, Wayne, and we didn't know where you were for a minute.
I had enough.
Right? Thank you. Honesty. That's all we want here. We just want the truth. No, but it is about time to get out of here. So at least you got back in here, so we can just send you off, right? But I wanted to give you a proper send off, and just tell you how much I really deeply appreciate your work and your time, and for sharing everything that you did with us today. It means a lot, man. It always does when people take time, and I really appreciate it. I know you're in cozy LA and everything's perfect, and all that. So I just know I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's fun to talk these things out sometimes. It helps you kind of get it clear in my own mind sometimes.
Yeah, right on. Well, again, Wayne, for me too, I really appreciate you doing this with us. And one of the reasons why we're glad we got you back before we, hung up the show entirely is because we always want to give people a chance to let people know where to find them. So if some people aren't already following you on Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff, what's the best places for them to learn more about Wayne White?
Well, my Instagram is probably the best place, and that's Wayne White Art on Instagram. And I'm not much of a Twitter guy, but that's Wayne White Art too. It's all of them. And there's WayneWhiteArt.com, my brand new website that I urge everybody to see. I just finished it last week, and it's vastly new and improved, and it's got like 40 years of work on it. So that's a pretty cool thing.
And when will we be able to see the video that we mentioned that you just completed?
You know what? I think that's going to premiere, maybe it premieres today. I'm sorry I don't have all the info on that. It's Waltzer's new video, and you could.
It'll be on Twitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure to find a link for it. And if people are, anybody who's listening to the show, we'll be sure to post some kind of a link for it so people will be able to see it through us or following you. I'm sure they'll be able to find it as well.
Okay, thanks. Sorry I didn't have the.
That's okay. That's fine.
And is there anything else that you feel like you want to share or get off your chest before we shut this whole thing down?
Well, I just want to say hey to all my buddies in Nashville. Because I love Nashville. And hey out there, everybody. Hope y'all are doing good.
Well done. Well, Wayne White, really appreciate it. We're going to shut this thing down, but hang on the line here for a minute. We'll do a little post wrap so we can take at least a couple more minutes of your time. But really, again, appreciate it, and thanks everybody for watching and the questions and all the enthusiasm. So Wayne and everybody, thanks a lot, and we're out.
Bye.